Hi there, my name is Corey Walker and welcome to ProRigs. Today I'm going to be going into the functionality of our assets. We have very unique assets here at ProRigs and that are of the same quality and functionality of a feature level rig, and maybe even more. We've added every bell and whistle that we could think of to make the animator's life and day-to-day job less of a headache and more of an enjoyable task. Once you've gone ahead and downloaded all the files that you want and or need, you can go ahead and open and or reference the rig into your scene. I highly recommend referencing characters when you go to animate so that you don't destroy any of the original information by accidentally deleting a control or anything along those lines. Now that you've referenced in your rig, let's go ahead and take a look at the base control. There's technically two base controls. There is the base parent and the base itself. The base parent is just a great control to put your character or asset into a scene. For example, if your character were to be walking into a saloon, you don't want to necessarily leave this base parent right at the center and then translate all of the other parts of the character away. It would be much easier if you just move the base parent, maybe even rotate it if need be, and then have the character walk from there, dictating that this is the starting point for your character. You'll notice there's no scale or any extra attributes but translation and rotation. This also makes it a great control if your character is standing on a skateboard, a surfboard, is attached to any kind of object. This is a great control to use as a constraint to make sure that everything under the hierarchy will follow. After that, I'm going to go ahead and zero these all back out. We will talk about the base control. Here on the base control, you'll see the same translation and rotational data that the base parent has, and this would be for if you wanted your character to start to move away from said area. So you can place your character in scene and then use this to translate them around. You'll notice, however, there is not 3 individual scale options for X, Y, and Z, but one unified global scale option. This allows you to get the best functionality of scaling without having to worry about breaking anything. The caveat to this is that we cannot pancake our character. Let's say he got squashed by something, we can't just completely flatten him because we do not have the individual channels. But these are realistic feature level characters, and we feel that the trade-off to having them flat versus the stability of a global scale wasn't worth it. You'll notice if we set the scale all the way down to 0, the character will not scale down to 0. This is an industry no-no and is not a great practice. There are other ways to hide your rig if need be, and global scales should not be one of them. So we've gone ahead and capped that for you so you'll never have any issues. Of course, you can also scale up, so you can always do whatever you need for the scale to match the environment that your character may be in. Super handy. Just below that, we will see that there is the Anim Control Viz section of these attributes. These really help an animator hone in on certain parts of the rig and not worry about others. So for example, if all you wanted to animate right now was, let's say, the arms, that's the only part of the shot that you're currently working on, you can go ahead and turn off all of our controls and then just turn back on the arms. Super helpful for when you want to just select a small portion of the rig. You can see I've did a nice box select and I don't have to worry about grabbing any parts of the chest or the neck or the face. So of course this is going to be a huge time save for the everyday animator. Continuing down, you'll notice just below the Anim Control Viz is the Anim Polish Extra. These are all of the controls that really take the rig's functions from just being a layman's everyday rig to the high-end finesse of the feature level quality. You'll notice that we have gimbal controls located on all of the FK arms, FK legs, and IK arms. You'll see those if I turn them off and on. We also have one around the root. So any area that you would expect a gimbal is needed for any further adjustments, we have added one. You can see it here on the head as well. Any place that we saw fit. Below that is going to be body polish, and body polish in turn is going to be all of the bend bows or shaper controls for those arms and legs, aka body polish. We then have our clothing attribute, which will just turn off and on all of the controls that have to do with clothes. You can see that here. Next down is face polish, and this is a great option to turn on when you're ready to take your facial animation to that next step. So I would highly recommend, of course, leaving all of these off during blocking stages or maybe even the latter part of blocking. But once you move out of blocking and into IP or polish, these are really helpful to turn on to help push your emotional and visual appeal. Below that, you'll notice we have the section called Geometry Viz. This will further allow you to help section off what you're working on. So if we are just working on a head shot right now, and we don't need the rest of the body visible, we can go ahead and turn all of those off and leave the head and neck on. Or if we're doing a walk cycle and we really just want to focus in on the legs and we don't want to see anything else, we can go ahead and turn the legs on here. And let's go ahead and turn off all of our viz. And just turn back on the legs now. And you can see where this is very helpful, that now the animator, or yourself, can get into just the legs and work on the root and the feet, and all of the things that may be popping or sliding along the ground. So this is super handy. You won't have to worry about any arms getting in your way or anything else distracting you. A nice addition to these attributes is that we've actually included a hierarchy in this system. And what I mean by that is when we grab the Anim Polish extra controls, we can turn them off and on their own, or they can fall under their retrospected category. For example, if I turn off face control, I do not need to come down and turn on face polish or turn off face polish as well. We found that to be very redundant and time consuming. So to solve or mitigate this issue, you can turn off face polish and just face polish if you want to work on the face and just the blocking stages. Or you can turn off just face control viz and it will turn them off both together. This holds true for everything down the body. If we turn off the torso here, you will notice all of the clothing controls that have to do with the torso will disappear as well. This will also be said for left and right sleeves as well as the leg pant controls. You can see this now when I turn off and on the arms versus just the clothing. You can see that the arms are driving those control viz as well, but the control viz has nothing to do, or the clothing viz has nothing to do with the arm control viz. We believe this will be very helpful to you and super handy throughout your time animating here. And you'll notice just below this, there is one final section for the base control. And that is our geo display type and geo complexity. Geo display type is very helpful as we move forward in the rigging department. Animators beforehand would want to box select or drag select a large portion of their characters. However, without this on, so if I turn geo display type to normal, you will notice when I do a drag select, our mesh is selected as well. This is an unfortunate waste of time for me to come in, or for you to go in and unselect all of the geometry that you don't want to be a part of that selection. To help solve this in the olden times, you would turn off this select geometry function, and now when we drag select, we can select our controls. However, as rigging has improved and rigging artists have changed their workflows, we now use and incorporate the spheres and geometry to actually represent the face controls. This does two things. One, it's visually more appealing rather than having a bunch of little circle controls placed all around the face. And two, it allows for the asset these controls to stay above the asset's skin or geometry. Oftentimes when you move the cheek or said control in this area, you can see I can't select that. So we will need to turn this back on for us to be able to select the geometry controls. However, again, because we've turned back on the geometry, we are now selecting the mesh, and we don't want that. So to solve this issue, the rigging department here has gone ahead and added the geo display type as an attribute. Now we can go ahead and set this to reference. It should already be on reference when you bring in their character, but in case it gets switched off, it's always good to know. You want to make sure this is set to reference, so even if our object select mode or our geometry select mode is enabled, we can go ahead and drag select our character, and none of the geometry will be selected that we don't want, because all of that has been locked and selected into this attribute. And finally here on the base control is the geo complexity. The geo complexity is just how smooth your mesh is going to be. So let me go ahead and turn off all of the controls for just a moment. You'll notice I don't have to turn off the polish controls because, again, they are a subsidiary of the control viz. I'm going to turn on now my edge loop wireframe so we can see what the changes happen. I'm going ahead and set the geo complexity to 0, and you will see the mesh slightly unsmooth. This is very similar to as if you select the mesh and push 1 and or 3 on the keyboard. Again, we wanted to alleviate that because we wanted to create the most simple rig we can while still being as complex as possible. So to ensure that as an animator you never need to select the geometry and be aware of setting it between 1 and 3 on the keyboard, you can always just come on down to your base control and turn up the geo complexity. This is a slider value of between 0, 1, and 2. Each level just creating higher deforms mesh. So if we set this to 0, we can see very harsh angles here on the hair, and of course the ears and rest of the body. Setting the value to 1 will slightly start to smooth things out, but you can still see somewhat of hard edges. This is great for if your computer can handle having a little bit more geometry in the scene. If your computer is a bit older and your hardware is not as new, you may want to turn the geo complexity down to 0 to help increase the speed of your rig. However, we have gone over this rigs multiple times with as fine comb as we can to provide the utmost optimization. We believe these rigs will run at 24 frames a second on just about every machine that can handle Maya. But just in case, we do create this geo complexity so you can down-res the model if need be. Of course, if you're going to play blast and show it, I would recommend setting it to 1. And if you're going to play blast and render it for your demo reel or for a final representation of your shot, I would highly recommend setting it to geo complexity 2, even though it will take your scene longer to play blast.